Hi everyone, I'm Calmejane, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of Societe Generale. Can I ask you to stand up? Just a little bit, stand up to get the blood going, flowing. Thank you. Who is working in banks here? Nobody. Me, you, at least we are three. Thank you, you can sit down. So today the title of my presentation is Banks Leading the Path of Tokenization. Why is it important for us? So we're going to go through an overview of what banks are doing worldwide. Then I'm going to explain why is it important, what's happening, when is it going to happen, give a few examples of what we are doing in Societe Generale. So that's just a little bit about me. So I've been working at Societe Generale for the past 5 years, but before, I've been transforming organization and large financial services for more than 17 years. So I didn't choose, like David, to leave and do my startups. I decided to stay and keep transforming the main organization. So that's just an overview of what banks are doing worldwide. So that's the way when we think about digital assets, how do we categorize them when we work in banks? That's one definition. I'm sure we can find many, but most of my peers do align with this definition. So in the field of cryptocurrencies, generally, from a risk-based perspective, most of the banks don't operate this type of, assets and transactions. So very rarely do you see banks across the world to do this type of, to propose this type of assets as part of their offering. The one that you start seeing in banks is where it starts from the red to the blue. It's around settlement coins, so either a stable coin, where we can see some activities. So in Societe Generale, we backed the first French stablecoin called the LE, providing account services to them. We are working actively on wholesale and retail CBDCs, and that's the case of most of the banks worldwide. So in France, for example, the Banque de France have issued, as part of the pilot regime, a wholesale CBDC that we are using as part of some of our models. And you can see this replicated across several banks in the world. And most of the banks are involved in retail CBDCs project. And in Europe, more specifically, we do have a working group at the ECB, which is defining and working together into what can it entail. When it comes to utility tokens, there is a large interest from banks, but not so many application and use cases. So we are still waiting to see that. Security tokens, that's where we are the most active at the moment, and where you see the most of business model and application and use cases that are live. And non-fungible tokens, it's basically most experimenting from a banking point of view around NFTs or metaverse areas. So this joined a little bit David's presentation, where you can see that, the last three in blue are basically where we see, fiat currency, utility, and security, red and the two blue in the middle, as where we see most of the activities at the moment. And I will come back to that, but, of course, we share a little bit David's vision, maybe not on the same time frame, but we share David's vision on the fact that there is a market there. So why is it important for banks? When we talk about tokenization, the tokenization is basically the digital representation of an asset and its rights through a digital form. And you have two types of tokenization. You have two types of token, that exist. You have the asset-backed tokens, where the token is referred elsewhere, and you have the native token, where the token is basically the security or and the representation itself. And almost everything in the world can be tokenized, from financial assets to physical world. And that's form part of what we call the Web3 economy. And when we think about that, obviously, banks will want to be in this type of emerging ecosystem. So this raises interest about how the Web3 economy is working, what the token represents, and as we are present in the financial assets of the real economy today, we obviously want to be present in the Web3 economy and what it can entail. And so that's why banks are present in these areas, and investing in it. So what is happening exactly? When we talk about these tokens, there are different types of use cases. The first type of use case is basically just a replication of what's happening in the financial world, such as, for example, today we provide custody of your assets from a banking perspective. So in the digital world, we can provide digital custody of your assets. So that's just a basic translation and something that you can do cheaper, better, faster than the traditional world today. So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do is you can have more radical use case. And here we can think about the payment world. So you can do atomic settlement, you can do cross-border payments using the infrastructure of the blockchain and the tokens that are used into it in order to operate transactions that take several days, several months, and almost do them instantly. So that's more a radical, profound transformation of the offering and services that we have today. And the last one is basically we can radically reinvent the value chain that go from primary market to post-trade. And that's the type of work that I will go more in detail. We've started to do with Forge, our subsidiary in Societe Generale, to basically leverage the blockchain technology and the security token through the wholesale CDBC provided by Banque de France to basically reinvent fully a new business model that don't work with the same economics that the value chain that we see today. And that's much more radical in terms of what we rethink. And just to give you an idea, I know most of you, are not working in banks, but I mentioned I've been doing, digital transformation for a little while now, and even published at MIT around it. And for me, it reminds me the transformation of payments that started about 15 years ago. 15 years ago, we started to see these fintechs, these emerging fintechs, which were very small, the Stripes of this world, the Adyen of this world. And basically, when you look 15 years later, of course, they have grown. They've managed to reinvent part of the value chain, monetize differently, and deliver services differently. But in order to go further, we can see that you need the global ecosystem to evolve around it. We need the e-commerce to take up. We need customers to buy more online. So we need a full shift of our economies in order to make that happen. And it's the same thing for me in blockchain. And it's the same thing for me in tokenization. Is at the end of the day, what's going to lead it is the customer adoption, the market which is there, and the technology solution we are building today. They are valid. They have some use case. As David was mentioning, we are at the beginning of the curve. We can see that there are some use cases that are there. But for the new business model to really validate themselves, it will take the full customer shift around it. So how can this happen? Clearly, we need consistency in the regulation and the local regulation. So today, there are different positions of regulators and there are working groups, and initiatives, but there is not a single way that we see the regulation worldwide. We can see some movement in the US, some other movement in Asia, some other movement in Europe. In Europe, you can see local initiative and regulation. So all of that need to be clearer in order to achieve an industrial capability. We need more standards and more collaborations across the patch. And last, for us, it will take a long journey, so David was showing his graph where you can see it was more on 2030. So for us, we think it's even a little bit longer in order to do this transformation. So it will take time, it will need alignment on the regulation and the standards, and it will take, the full ecosystem of, financial services players, startups, investors, regulators, in order to make that happen. So why do I think banks are well positioned in tokenization? Clearly, we can say, banks are still catching up with Web 2. They are still trying to digitalize their offerings and still trying to deliver a better experience leveraging digital. Yes, but this is coming to maturity. In most of our banks, most of our geographies, Societe Generale is present in Europe, Africa, Asia, and US States. Most of the digital sales, digital acquisition are now coming to maturity, and the supervision and management is also coming to maturity. So it's actually a good timing in order to look at a different horizon and to be part also of this Web3 transformation. The way we are doing it is we are learning by doing and experimenting, on public blockchain, on different type of blockchain, collaborating with other banks, with other actors around doing that. Currently, we have our subsidiary Forge running the CAST challenge, or open source network, where they have sourced different startups that can help to access and provide different services for the security tokens which are on the Forge platform, and we are doing that with startups, not just by ourselves. And last but not least, this is a complex world, and I do believe, banks, people that master finance practices and regulation, are the best position in order to really lead the path for tokenization. But that will open a lot of opportunities and a lot of new markets, that are going to come here. So I didn't want it to leave without giving you some concrete applications of what we are doing at Societe Generale. I mentioned our subsidiary, Societe Generale Forge. It was part of an internal startup call. So in Societe Generale, we launched about 60 startups in 2019 when I took my job. And the leading one, the one we found most disruptive, was Forge. And what's very interesting about Forge is they were all coming from different horizons. The guy didn't know each other before. One was in security, one was in IT, one was a commercial in the asset management arm, and one was working in capital market. And actually, at the beginning, it was two different teams, and they came together and said, there is really something there. And it was put under the sponsorship of the CEO of the investment bank that just became our CEO a couple of months ago. Societe Generale Forge, now has been implemented for 4 years. In Societe Generale, it's a very mature platform. We have operated about 25 security tokens transactions. I will describe one in a minute. We have 2 different products, and we have about 15 clients from asset management to financial institutions that are using the platform regularly. One operation that we did through Societe Generale Forge was what we call Project Mercure in the industry. So it was a transaction commissioned by the EIB. So they were the issuer. They operated the transaction through Societe Generale Forge platform. There were 3 book runners, which were Societe Generale, Goldman Sachs, and Santander, that basically sold to the investor, leveraging the CAST open source model, as I was mentioning. And just to give you an idea of the level of disruption, when you are talking about an EIB, which is an institution, and quite a conservative institution, the level of disruption of them operating this type of transaction and a digital token is probably the same as the Pope dancing with Paris Hilton. So that was just to give you an insight on why do I believe banks are well positioned to lead the path to this tokenization. Like David, we think it's coming, and we are at the beginning of this curve, and these are the way very concretely that we are delivering that. Thank you very much.